Imagine a world where money doesn't exist. No bills, no coins, no digital transfers, no credit cards, no debt. Sounds like a utopian dream, right? A society free from greed, poverty, and endless financial anxiety. But what if I told you the truth behind a world without money is far darker, far more complex, and potentially more terrifying than you could ever conceive? What if the absence of currency didn't lead to paradise, but instead unleashed something primal and untamed within humanity? For centuries, thinkers, philosophers, and revolutionaries have envisioned a world without money. From Plato's Republic to Marx's communism, the idea of transcending the need for currency has fascinated us. The core argument always revolved around removing the corrupting influence of wealth, believing that without it, human beings would instinctively cooperate, share resources, and live in peaceful harmony. This isn't just an ancient fantasy. Modern-day movements and even some advanced technological proposals still flirt with the concept of a post-scarcity economy where monetary exchange becomes obsolete. The promise was that needs would be met, everyone would contribute according to their abilities, and the inherent inequalities fostered by wealth accumulation would simply vanish. No more starvation next to overflowing warehouses, no more desperate struggles for survival while others live in opulent excess. On paper, it's a compelling narrative, a compelling siren song of societal perfection. But here's the critical, often overlooked detail. These visions rarely, if ever, account for human nature at scale. They underestimate the fundamental role money, in all its forms, plays in mediating our interactions, dictating our priorities, and perhaps most crucially, limiting our baser instincts. To truly grasp the horror, we must first understand the delicate balance money maintains. The initial phase of this grand experiment, the Great Demonetization, as it was optimistically called, began with a coordinated global effort. Governments, influenced by powerful economic models that promised unprecedented efficiency through direct resource allocation, gradually phased out traditional currencies. Digital ledgers replaced bank accounts, initially tracking goods and services, not value. The transition was presented as liberation, a release from the shackles of capitalism. For a brief, intoxicating period, there was a sense of elation. People acquired what they needed, theoretically. Food was distributed freely, housing was allocated, healthcare was universal. The daily grind for money seemed to evaporate, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. But then the first cracks appeared, not in the grand theoretical systems, but in the micro-interactions of everyday life. If everything was free or allocated, why work the undesirable jobs? Sanitation, dangerous manufacturing, even basic agriculture started seeing significant labor shortages. Who would spend hours cleaning waste if they received the same allocated rations as someone who spent their days in leisure or pursuing hobbies? The intrinsic motivation of reward, the very engine of productivity in a complex society, began to sputter. The carefully constructed utopian facade began to fray as people discovered that allocation often meant long waits, limited choices, and a crushing, dehumanizing bureaucracy deciding their every provision. This wasn't freedom, it was a different kind of constraint, a far more insidious one that chipped away at individual agency. The value of true skill, of specialized knowledge, began to erode. Doctors, brilliant engineers, and even artists found their contributions valued the same as someone who barely showed up for their assigned labor. Resentment festered, a silent poison seeping into the collective psyche, slowly corrupting the good intentions that built this cashless world. The inherent human desire for self-determination, for recognition of effort, found no outlet in this equitable system, leading to a profound sense of stagnation and despair. This was merely the beginning of the real escalation, the slow unraveling of everything once considered civilized. As the state-controlled distribution system buckled under its own weight and the burgeoning apathy of a despondent populace, a new, terrifying economy began to emerge from the shadows. It wasn't based on centralized allocation, it was based on raw, unfiltered human needs and desires, and the brutal reality of who could fulfill them. Forget algorithms and resource modeling. The new currency became favors, influence, and ultimately power. If you needed specialty medicine not readily available through the choked public system, who would get it for you? Not a bureaucrat, but the person who knew where illicit stores were or who had a contact in the defunct pharmaceutical facilities. Their price wasn't a number, it was a promise of loyalty, a promise of a future service, a promise of something far more valuable than gold, human effort directed solely at their command. The real terror of this system was its subjectivity. The value of a carton of fresh eggs, once a trivial sum, could be exchanged for a week's worth of protection or even a human life, depending on the desperation of the buyer and the whims of the seller. Bartering in its primitive form returned. But it wasn't the gentle exchange of surplus goods. It was a cutthroat negotiation where social standing, physical strength, and the ability to intimidate became paramount. Gangs, once fringe elements, ascended to become the new banks, facilitating transactions and enforcing debts with a brutal efficiency that made any historical mob boss seem benevolent. Their currency was fear, their interest rates were limbs, and their repossession clauses were lives. People started accumulating objects, not for their utility, but for their convertibility into favors or security. A vintage watch, a rare book, even a collection of pristine hand tools became more valuable than a stale loaf of bread because the bread was consumed while the object held enduring potential for exchange. Specialist skills, once devalued, became terrifyingly potent. A skilled mechanic could demand control over a small community's transport, becoming an indispensable tyrant. A doctor, no longer constrained by ethics, could trade life-saving procedures for absolute obedience. The post-scarcity dream had morphed into a hyper-scarcity nightmare, where the most basic necessities were leveraged for unimaginable power, and the societal fabric, once held together by the invisible threads of economic exchange, had ripped apart, revealing the raw, untamed beast beneath. The world, supposedly liberated from financial anxiety, was now gripped by a far more visceral daily terror, the anxiety of survival in a system where humanity's basest impulses were the ultimate arbiter of value. The breakdown was complete, revealing a fundamental truth about our species that no utopian ideal could ever fully erase. What they discovered next, in the grim reality of a truly cashless society, was that human beings are fundamentally wired for exchange, for value. If you remove the abstract, quantifiable medium of money, we don't stop valuing things. We simply find new, often far more brutal ways to assign worth. The value of a day's labor for basic sustenance was no longer measured in a digital bank transfer, but in the physical effort required, the risks taken, the connections forged, and the promises made. The most valuable commodity wasn't gold or information, but trust, a commodity that became incredibly scarce and incredibly dangerous to offer. And the lack of money didn't eliminate greed, it simply transformed it. Greed for resources, for control, for power over others, became rampant and unrestrained by any common measure of worth. The very concept of a shared economy, a collective responsibility, dissolved into a tribalistic struggle for survival. Neighbors became rivals, communities shattered, and the grand utopian vision collapsed under the weight of its own flawed assumptions about human nature. The absence of money didn't create equality. It created a new, far more stratified hierarchy based on pure, unadulterated strength, cunning, and the willingness to exploit others. It was a dark mirror reflecting back our deepest, most uncomfortable truths. To this day, the echoes of that failed experiment serve as a chilling reminder. We may never fully comprehend the intricate, almost invisible ways that money, for all its perceived flaws, acts as an essential lubricant in the vast, complex machinery of human society. It provides a universal language of value, a quantifiable and mostly impartial medium of exchange that allows us to interact, specialize, and build without resorting to brute force or perpetual obligation. Perhaps the greatest lesson learned is that human nature, with all its beautiful complexities and terrifying shadows, demands a system of exchange. Whether that system is currency, favors, or something far more sinister, the need to quantify effort, reward, and resource allocation is an undeniable, persistent force. If you want more insights into the hidden structures that govern our world and the uncomfortable truths they reveal, the next video explores the terrifying implications of a world where privacy is a forgotten concept. Until then, consider the true cost of free,